if you're in here, you should have a combine with automation. So it would be a 50 or a 60 series combine with harvest automation. So right there at the beginning, I got a picture of all the sensors that are involved in harvest command automation. You can see there's quite a few there. I won't go through all of them, but it's a nice little overview. We'll touch base on that a little bit later here. So, basics of automation, I'm including the Pro 1200 screenshots in here right alongside the 700 screenshots for anybody that has a 60 series combine this year. Those come standard with dual Pro 1200s, so just making it relevant for both machines, and you can kind of see what the similarities and differences are for those of you that may have one next year. So as you can see, Harvest Command works with corn, soybeans, wheat, canola, and there's 4 modes of operation: grain quality, performance, fixed throughput, and max throughput. Really the only thing that we're going to be using around here, or that I set guys up with, is performance, because we want to balance the grain quality and losses and clean sample. The other ones, probably not terribly relevant unless, fixed throughput, if you had a 2,000 bushel an hour dryer and you were just trying to keep up exactly with that, or something really specific, maximum throughput. I guess if it was going to rain for a week or snow coming up and you didn't care if you were losing corn out the back and you just wanted to go as fast as you could go, you could do that. But for the most part, you're probably just going to be doing performance. So automation will automatically adjust the machine based on how you set all of the sensitivities of the sensors in those funnels that you see at the bottom. So it'll vary your rotor speed, fan speed, ground speed, if you're using the feed rate function, which I'll get to, the upper, lower presieve, and the vane positions. So if you're new to automation, I guess the biggest kind of hump to get over when you're looking at your loss funnels at the bottom is, if you look at the ones that are sitting in red, guys will think, my funnel's red, that's bad, I need to turn my sensitivity down. Well, that doesn't actually fix it. You need to kind of ignore what you're seeing on the funnels until you actually look what's in the sample physically, see if there's any grain damage physically, get out and check if there's sieve loss, do a kill stall, see if you're getting rotor loss, and then you adjust the sensitivities from there based on what you're seeing. So when you actually start combining, and I don't know if I have it in this page yet, but when you actually start combining, you'll be able to click on all of those square boxes at the bottom and go through one by one, and it'll give you a pop-up and ask how you want to adjust that sensitivity. So if I got out and I saw there was all kinds of corn on the ground, I'm going to go click on my sieve loss, and I'm going to click way too much, and then it automatically adjusts from there. So what you want to do is just basically follow that and go through and click what you're actually seeing on the ground in the tank, and then from there the sensitivities will ride up near that black line or the black triangles, and once it goes above the triangle, that's when the machine makes a change. So you want to set it as sensitive as you can, but not too sensitive, just as sensitive as you can, so that when you do get to that spot where you go through a ditch or whatever, go through a hill where there's more grain and there's a big change, the machine sees it and reacts quicker. So when you turn Harvest Command Automation on, so you can see on either display, when you click the button at the top, it's going to be located by your radio on the headliner on the right side. You'll get an A up there, kind of in the little cab area on the 700, and then on the left hand area right underneath the picture of the combine on the 1200. So when the A is on, just indicating you're in automation mode. When you see that H, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not in automation mode. It just means you're in headland mode. So when your head is lifted up, you might see that H there. So that's just the main run screen, the default run screen one. So there you can see a lot of the similarities and a few differences. So kind of just an updated, nicer looking picture on the 1200, and the other difference there is that all the boxes that show your sieve opening measurements and your rotor speed and all of those parameters, you can actually click on the boxes on the 1200 and type in whatever value you want. On the 700 50 series machines, you cannot. You have to use the buttons on the armrest. Not a big major difference, but that's one of the different things there, I guess. So when you're getting set up to run automation, first of all, you need to select the crop type. Selecting your crop type on the 1200, you don't have a dedicated run screen with the grower, farm, and field and crop anymore. It's all stored in a separate grower, farm, and field page, which is this little picture of a farm with a silo up in the top right. So once you have your crop type selected, you're going to select your strategy, which we had talked about, that we're going to do performance and try and balance the quality of the grain with minimizing losses as well. So the other part of automation is feed rate. Maybe some of you have never ran feed rate before, so I guess I'll explain how that works. So automation you can run separately or you can run them together. So automation is going to control all of the machine settings like your sieve and your rotor like we talked about. Feed rate is going to simply control your ground speed. So when you're going in and out of dryland corners cutting beans and it's really thin in the corners, it'll sense the transmission drive pressure and the engine load and speed up to whatever the max speed. I mean, it's variable, but it can go up to the max speed that you set. And then when you get into a ditch or an irrigated spot where it's tough and that ground pressure goes up and the engine load goes up, it'll automatically slow itself down. So kind of a cruise control type feature. And like I said, you can run automation and feed rate together or separately. If you'd rather run it yourself, you can kind of see what's coming, but this year everything should be a little more consistent. So I think feed rate should work pretty good for us this year. So like I said, you need to type in a target max ground speed, is why you see that parameter at the bottom right there. And you typically just want to do probably a half mile an hour to a mile an hour faster than typical run speed. And you also have to put in your max engine load. And it says 100% on there, and you can do that if you want. But when we're cutting the tough green beans, I usually put 90 to 95 in there. I don't want to end up in a situation where I come up on an unexpected wad of green beans and slug it. So I usually give myself a little bit of room for error. Anytime you see the blue eye on the 700 or on the 1200, they're actually little blue question marks now. You can click on those and it actually gives you a little bit more information, a whole definition of what it's asking for on that specific window. So right there I have a screenshot of the strategies window. It kind of actually tells you what each one is if you're not sure when you leave here and you actually get in the field later if you can't remember. Work conditions, you may be familiar with work conditions, but you can create work conditions for different scenarios, like your early wet tough green beans. You can make a separate one for your later dry beans. You can make one for wet corn, dry corn, and that way you don't have to go back through, set up different ranges, set up different sensitivities, because there are going to be, automation will adjust itself per condition but there are a little bit of limitations. It'll work a lot better if you kind of adjust to each crop and each condition of crop. So really wet versus really dry, kind of an extreme. So when you make your work condition and you start off for the year and you name it early beans, it'll actually save everything you do within the basic tab, the advanced tab, sensitivities, custom ranges, which we'll get to, and your concave openings. So I'll touch on that quick, I guess, now that I mentioned it. It will save your concave opening. Automation does not change your concave opening. That's the only thing it does not save. So when you put it in your work condition, the machine will move it to 18 millimeters, and that's where it'll stay, but automation will not move it as you're going through. That's the only thing it does not change. You have to figure that one out on your own when you start going through the field. The advanced tab in automation. So here's where we're going to find our threshing condition. So right now you see it's on easy on the 1200 screenshot and the 700 plus screenshot. So the threshing condition is meant to be for the toughness of the crop. So what it really does in the background is it raises the lower end of the range of speed that the rotor can go. So whenever I set them up, usually no matter what I'm doing, I select easy because I want the rotor to be able to go the full range. So when you're harvesting corn, the default rotor range I think is something like 300 to 550. I can't remember for sure, something like that. But if you were to change the threshing condition from easy to high, it'd probably change that bottom end 400 to 550. So that's why, especially on corn, I usually leave it on easy because I want to be able to go down to 300, 350 area, especially when you're harvesting the drier crop. So they also see your feed rate sensitivity. So if you're going to be running feed rate, typically I put that on high. I kind of want it to be able to react a little faster. With this year, like I said, being consistent, there shouldn't really be too many different patches. You could lower that, but I have not really seen a reason to. Even when you set it to high, it doesn't seem like it's really, going crazy, really slow to really fast. So I always set them up on high, and it's had pretty good results so far. On the 1200 and the 700 plus, you also have the max rotor speed setting. So like I said, by default, gear 1 will let you go to, I don't remember sure what it is, it might be 600, but a lot of times you don't want it going that high, especially on dry corn. If it gets confused or you put some settings in there you didn't mean to, you don't want it going 600 RPM, creating a lot of grain damage. So you can put an actual limit in there for a max rotor speed. So you'll notice on the 1200 screenshot, there's a range configuration on-off button. So that is in a different spot now, is why I'm pointing that out. So you actually have to flip that little switch on in order to create those custom ranges. On the 700, there is a separate dedicated range tab. So nothing has changed there if you've been around automation before on the 700. But just a note, on the 1200, it's in the advanced tab. I think we went through all that on the advanced tab already. So the sensitivities tab would be the next thing up. So typically you don't need to come in here and manually change sensitivities because, like I said at the beginning, when you start combining and you go through and press each one of those buttons next to your little loss funnels, you're going to click if the losses are acceptable or too much or could be more, and it will adjust the sensitivities by itself automatically. It adjusts those numbers in the background. So I don't need to come into this page and really change anything, but it's a good thing to have a picture of for next year in those same conditions. if you forget or don't make work conditions, because like I said, the work conditions save that, but it's never a bad idea to have a backup picture. So that's kind of what I use that for. Loss meters we touched on earlier. Like I said, the little black triangle about 3/4 of the way up is where the system decides it's going to make a change if the losses get above that. So a lot of times I'll be riding with guys and they're used to the older combines where you don't want to see anything in those funnels. You're happy if you see nothing in there because that means I have no loss. Well, that's not really what you want on here. I just want to turn the sensitivity up high enough so that when I'm at a level of loss that I'm happy, I am near that black line. I want it so sensitive that even with almost no loss, I'm near the threshold where the machine's going to make a change. So then, if I'm happy with 2 kernels per square foot, as soon as it sees 3 kernels per square foot, it makes a change right away. So that's kind of the logic behind why those lines are 3/4 of the way up the funnels. So we touched on that earlier, clicking through each one of those buttons, and that's the pop-up I mentioned where you click each funnel, starting from left to right, and you'll look at what's physically out there, say if it's acceptable, too much, and so on. The only thing that is different new on the 1200 screen that I will mention, or the 60 series combines, every machine with automation has a grain cam, and I think I have that in one of the next slides here, but I'll get to it. But every machine has a grain cam on the clean grain elevator, and it takes a snapshot picture of a sample of grain, and it actually picks out what's grain damage and what's material other than grain or trash. So on the 700s, 50 series machines, you could never actually view that picture. On the 1200, you got that little button, a picture of a camera right next to where it says unthreshed behind the one. You can actually click on that and it will show you a picture from the grain cam of the sample. And it actually highlights in color what's damaged, what it thinks is damage, and what it thinks is trash. So kind of interesting, and I have a screenshot of that here I'll get to later. Tailing sensitivity, nothing has really changed there. That doesn't have much to do with automation. That's simply a level sensor. So when you go in there and you click on tailings, you're not going to get that too much acceptable, not enough type pop-up you'll get on all the other ones. Headlands. So if you haven't used the headlands tab, I guess I would encourage it. When I'm setting up automation machines at the minimum, the one thing I do is I always lower the fan speed. So when I have a negative 145 or negative 150, that means when I lift my head up at the end of the pass and I'm going to turn around, it automatically lowers that fan speed down and doesn't blow those last few kernels or pods out the back of the machine. The other thing you can do is open up your upper sieve a little bit. You can change those settings to do whatever you want when you turn around. Now the only thing, depending on software version on the 50 series machines at least, you have your header presets when you hit the resume button. You have your 1 and 2. A lot of guys use those for 1 on the ground, 2 being lifted up on the end. That's not what they were ever meant for. It was meant for 2 different cut heights, and then you hold the shift button on the back of the handle and then hit resume. That automatically lifts it up to your set header work height, and it puts it in headland mode. You have a status screen in there too. Not a whole lot you need to go in there unless you have a problem. It just kind of shows you everything that's online. And then we have our custom ranges adjustment that we had mentioned before. So this lets us kind of set limits on what automation is going to do. So like we kind of mentioned with the maximum rotor speed, you could put a maximum or a minimum on any other parameter on the machine, whether it be your upper sieve, lower sieve, cage vanes, whatever it may be. The most common one that I set up when I'm getting guys going on automation is typically your lower sieve on corn. Usually kind of put a low limit on that and keep it pretty far open, especially on wet corn. I know guys want to open it up all the way and keep it open. So one way of doing that is coming in here to custom ranges, changing the lower sieve. I think I got a picture of it. Changing the lower sieve minimum to 25. So the minimum is 25, max is 25, it's never going to move. So when you get to your dry corn later, you might want to have a wider range than that, but I still usually put something in there to limit how far closed it could go in case it gets confused or bad setting of some sort, and I don't want to fill my fan full, so I put something in that one all the time pretty much. The other common one is cage vanes, depending on crop and conditions. Soybeans, typically I like cage vanes to be medium to high, keep the material moving, and on corn I like to have it very slow to medium. So I put those ranges in there and then let automation do the work from there. I kind of give a little bit of constraints. So the work conditions that we had talked about earlier, this is just kind of an overview of some of the default work conditions and what the actual default settings that it has in the software. So if some of those are similar to what you've been doing in the past or seem like they'll work for what you're in, you can select those. You don't have to go through and change everything manually. There's some of them built into the software already. Okay, then we have the sieve pressure sensors. So every 50 series machine and the 60 series actually have sieve pressure sensors along the side rails. If you look in the back, you can see them along the side rails of the upper sieve. And it actually has kind of screened openings above and below the sieve. So it takes a pressure reading above and below and lets the operator know with a little bar graph that I'll show you how much air pressure load is on the sieve. So this kind of lets you know how much material is on top. It's a little bit, if you see the load going up and then all of a sudden it's all the way down, you kind of got to be paying attention to that, because you can tell that you got a heavy load on the sieve. You're combining 300 bushel corn, and then all of a sudden you get a pocket, a blowout. So that's where you might need to actually lower your fan speed. Kind of seems like the opposite of what you would think, but just gives you a little bit more insight into what's actually happening inside of the combine where you can't see it. So at the bottom, I guess I added on the 60 series combines, model year 25, they had updated, a little bit of an update with the screen. I can't say I've heard from any of you guys on any other issues with them for the screens getting plugged, but it does say you're not supposed to power wash them or get them kind of caked up. If you do wash inside of there, put a piece of tape over it. Maybe take a little brush and get the junk off of there. Potentially, if you're always seeing weird readings on them, you could have some buildup on them. So the grain camera image, which I can't see it real well on the projector there, but that's the image I was talking about earlier on the 60 series. It'll actually show you what the grain cam is seeing, and it actually highlights and outlines what it thinks is broken grain and what it thinks is material other than grain or trash. So it's pretty interesting. If I had the light off, you can see a little better, but I can show you later too if you're interested. But on the side of the clean grain elevator, right where the moisture temperature bypass is, you can actually take a little pin and swing that thing out. It's basically, I don't know, it's like a 6x6 little plexiglass that sits right against it, takes that image of what's coming in, where the moisture sample's being taken, and that's where that comes from. So if you're getting weird readings on that, which I really haven't had issues with grain cams this far anyways, but if you are, you can swing that open, wipe it off, make sure there's no dirt on it. There was a new knowledge article that came out here a couple weeks ago about condensation, so that's one thing to watch out for, I guess, depending on weather. You could get condensation on the lens. Pretty much just says wipe it off. So nothing crazy there, but just be aware of it. So limiting factor, when you get everything set up and you start running automation in the field, it's going to do its own thing, and then you kick on your feed rate, and it'll go up to whatever your max set speed is. So if I set my max to 5 miles an hour, it'll go up to 5 miles an hour as long as I don't have any other limiting factor. If I start going 4.5 and it starts creeping itself up to 5, and then I start throwing too much corn out the back, you might see this sieve loss icon pop up down there. If you're running a 700 machine, it'd be down in the bottom left. If you're running a 1200 machine, it'd be where that little number 1 is. So when one of those pops up, it's probably going to start slowing itself back down, and that's why. So if you're ever wondering why this thing is speeding up and then slowing down, those little icons will tell you why it's doing what it's doing. So as I mentioned, things automation can't do. It can't adjust your concave clearance. That's the one thing you need to do. It can't change out your modules. We have a variety of different module configurations. Most guys are running a lot of round bars now, but depending on what's in your machine, you may need, in conditions, you may need to swap out to a different configuration. And it can't adjust the sieve offset. I know I've talked to you a lot about putting offsets in, and that's one thing you need to do your kill stalls for, to see if you're threshing hard on one side, and then you can put an offset in and always have a negative or positive degree or 2 tilt on your sieve to kind of keep a level mat of grain across all the way back. So just a quick reminder, make sure the sieves are calibrated. When they leave the shop, we do it, but if you've had it for a few years and linkages get wore out, it's always a good thing to make sure you go through your sieve cals. We kind of touched on all the feed rate stuff, and I'm getting short on time, so we're good on that. I think we went through the feed rate sensitivities already. Like I said, normally we set them up with high. So the other thing that I forgot to mention here is the feed rate no load calibration. So these 1200 screenshots are ones I actually took in the yard, and I tried to turn on feed rate, and I actually got that 0 load not calibrated warning coming up. So for every head you put on, every new head you put on your combine, you need to do the 0 load cal. There's no physical buttons or process to do this. You simply just turn the separator on, turn the head on, lift the head all the way up, idle the combine all the way up, and sit there for 20 seconds. And then it basically calibrates how much engine power it takes to run that specific head. Yep. That's your feed rate button. If you haven't used it before, it kind of looks like a little cruise control button. The first time you run it for the day after a key cycle, you're going to have to hold it for a few seconds. You'll see a little hourglass icon up in the top left of the screen, and that little cruise control looking icon will turn dark, and that's when it starts taking over its own speed control. There's a couple other, and then the rest of the day, when you go turn around or grab the handle, it's just a single click to re-engage it. You don't have to hold it every time. That's only for the first time of the day or first time after a key cycle. To knock it out, you simply grab the handle, move it around. If you want to adjust your target, you can also hold the shift button and then press feeder house up or feeder house down to adjust the target feed rate speed. That's all I got. Any other questions on that? There is a resource here for YouTube videos on automation and a variety of other things for combines too.